tonight's Top Gear, Czechoslovakia goes front-wheel drive with the new Skoda Favorit. New laws for training and testing motorcyclists and the doubts about their effectiveness. And the Itala reaches Paris for the second time in 80 years.
Hello and welcome to this week's Top Gear. We're at Brands Hatch for the last event in the Autoglass Tour, an ambitious attempt to revive the old 1970s Tour of Britain. Unfortunately, the world of motorsport seemed to think it wasn't a particularly good idea, so very few competitors turned up. Later in the programme, our rally man Tony Mason reviews the week's competition and tries to find out whether or not this Phoenix will survive to fly another year. But we start tonight with a road test on a new car that's actually taking part in the Autoglass Tour, the new Skoda Favorit, taking up impossible angles with Skoda master John Howland at the wheel. When Chris Goffey took his place, things weren't quite so hectic.
They can tell you the exact date that the first Skoda joke appeared in the national press. Since then, it's all been downhill. The tail that wags the dog used to be a common complaint, but Skoda has achieved tremendous respect on the rally circuits of Europe. Now the sting in the tail, Porsche style, has been moved to the front in the new breed of Skoda, the Favorit. It's Skoda's first front-wheel drive car. Styled by Bertoni, its suspension fine-tuned by Porsche, and its well-proven 1289cc engine further developed by British engineers. The old advertising slogan used to be "Surprising Skoda," and once you get on the move, the Favorit's quite a surprising car too. It doesn't hang about. The engine feels slightly rough, but you've got to confess, up these Welsh hills, once the revs start climbing, the performance is very brisk indeed. Acceleration time is well up to other cars on the road. The gear change, well, that's swift and light. It's a 5-speed box, and there's enough torque low down to pull the car along, even with passengers. These sort of Welsh hairpins are fine for finding out about the handling too. Steering is slightly on the heavy side, and I'd like to see the turning circle a bit tighter. But that said, again, the Favorit does everything that the small 5-door hatchback competition can do for a lot less money. The ride isn't too bad at all. This is quite a bumpy road, and it's absorbing the more obvious potholes and road imperfections. And on these big fat Goodyear tyres, the actual adhesion level is very good indeed. You can throw this little Skoda around to your heart's content, and it's never going to bite you back. From the driver's point of view, the instrument layout is fine. They don't give you a rev counter, but they give you a large clock instead. The pedals are straight in front of the driver, and it's easy to operate them. In the old car, they used to be offset to one side, and after a couple of hours, I used to get a terrible pain in my hips. The switch gear is a little bit far away from the rim of the steering wheel to be completely finger touch operation. One thing I really don't like are these wing mirrors. The remote operation is very sticky and they jerk all over the place, and the actual glass is curved and gives a distorted image. Inside, the Czechoslovakian car has even more surprises. There's plenty of interior space, enough room for a 6-footer behind the 6-foot driver with the seat right back. The seats are trimmed in a very comfortable cloth material, and that's an addition since it was first introduced on the British market in response to initial criticism. The interior is quite well trimmed. These very flimsy door pockets rather stand out, but as long as you don't pull on them to shut the door, you'll get away with it. As you'd expect for a 5-door hatchback, the rear seat folds down, genuine pegboard back to it. But if you want to fold the seats right up to give you unobstructed load space, you've got to feed the rear seat belt buckles through this gap, and that's very fiddly. You can only open the tailgate with the ignition key, which can be a bit inconvenient. Not a huge boot. The spare wheel lives under this thin rubber mat, and that means you've got to unload everything if you get a puncture. But like many East European cars, they give you a comprehensive bulb replacement kit and also a decent tool roll should anything go wrong. The Skoda factory in Czechoslovakia actually owns the UK importing company, and they've got an import centre at King's Lynn where they do quite a lot to the basic Favorit when it comes in. They fit a rear wash wipe system, they fit a sunroof, they fit these mud flaps, and they also do the door cappings and the Philips car stereo. The cars come into this country fitted with decent Goodyear radial tyres and alloy wheels. Those are supplied by King's Lynn, who send them back to Czechoslovakia in the containers that the cars come over in. Under the bonnet, the familiar Skoda engine. Ricardo Engineering down at Shoreham-by-Sea in Sussex redesigned the combustion chambers for Skoda, and Porsche did a lot of work for them on the engine mountings here. Now, between them, they've done a very good job because there's very little engine transmission noise inside the car. Summing the car up, it's a very nice package indeed. You can judge it against its rivals and take out the money side of things. You can judge it on equal terms, and it stands up very well. So when you add in that amazing sale price of just over £5,000, the car becomes a very attractive alternative to something like a second-hand Fiesta or a second-hand Nova. And judged from that point of view, it makes very good sense indeed. The Favorit has already been out on the rally circuits of Europe, and it's notched up yet more class wins to add to Skoda's already impressive record. One thing this car should do is put an end to the Skoda joke, and that may not be such a bad thing because Skoda dealers have already reported their children being mercilessly teased and bullied at school. If they can crack the depreciation problems of the old model, then this car, on both terms of price and performance, represents a very competitive deal.
Well, if you're encouraged by all that to go out and buy a Favorit, please don't try to emulate John Howden's antics, particularly on the public roads. Now, all the figures suggest we have some of the safest roads in Europe. Obviously, there's still a great deal of room for improvement, particularly when it comes to training novices. Indeed, this is one of the ideas being sponsored here at Brands Hatch. Their early drive scheme takes youngsters under 17 and teaches them how to handle a car before they venture out onto the public road. And now the government wants to make this sort of scheme compulsory, not for car drivers, however, but for motorcyclists. And Tom Boz has been looking at this and other government schemes to make for safer motorcycling.
Motorcyclist casualty rates are the highest for any type of vehicle. The government claims that compared to car drivers, riders are 8 times more likely to be involved in an accident and 40 times more likely to be killed or seriously injured. In an attempt to cut the accident rate, the government is looking at radical changes in motorcycle training.
Next year, training like this will become compulsory and will be known as basic training.
Before a rider will be allowed on a public road, he will have to achieve a level of competence at an approved training centre, and only then, when his licence has been validated, will he be allowed to ride his machine on the roads without supervision. These rules will also apply to the car driver who wants to drive a moped. At present, he doesn't have to take a test. But what does affect the learner motorcyclist now is the introduction of a new test. From this week on, the examiner, instead of conducting the test on foot, will accompany the candidate on another motorcycle. This, says the ministry, will give the examiner a clearer picture of the candidate's riding skills.
Jim, take the next road.
A radio receiver attached to the candidate enables the examiner to stay in touch and pass directions when out on the road. This new test has the backing of those involved in motorcycle training and that of the Road Safety Officers Association.
It's an excellent idea. It should have been brought in years ago, and it's going to be far better than the old one, where the rider just wobbled round the houses.
There is universal agreement that the new test is a good idea, but next year's training proposals are considered to contain a major flaw.
Unfortunately, the government do not intend to set up a register of riding instructors. They've had to do it for car driving instructors because they wouldn't police themselves, and they really have got to do it for the motorcycle world as well.
Car driving school instructors are rigorously tested before becoming an approved driving instructor. They have to sit a written exam, a driver ability exam, and an instruction ability exam, all 3 of which have to be passed before being allowed to teach pupils. The importance of good tuition is paramount on today's crowded roads, and if that's so for cars, surely it's essential for bikes. Now, you may be forgiven for thinking no one's yet suggested that motorcycle instructors should be controlled and registered. Terry Phillips has recently attended several meetings at the Department of Transport.
Yes, and it was only at the last meeting that I found out there was not going to be a register of qualified instructors. I find that quite frightening, really, because it means that the people who are out there training new motorcyclists to ride motorcycles have no qualification whatsoever. And, of course, we end up with the blind leading the blind. The only way that we are going to go forward in the training world is to see proper qualified instructors doing the job.
Pull away.
The Ministry of Transport says, although we do not propose a register of motorcycle instructors on all fours with that for car drivers, we do intend that there should be regulation of those entitled to provide compulsory basic training for motorcyclists. Only bodies approved by the department will be able to offer compulsory training.
Now change back down for the gearbox, slow the bike down.
Under proper supervision, training can be a lifesaver. Pupils here are taught how to accelerate, change gear and brake before even being allowed to ride on the ground. Handling ability, the highway code and advice on clothing are all taught and assessed before pupils are allowed to ride on the public roads. Only when they are seen to be safe and confident will they be allowed on the highway, and even then only under supervision. These are the minimum standards needed for the mandatory training of motorcyclists.
If we are going to have compulsory training, then it's absolutely essential that we have a register of instructors. The instructors have got to be trained, they've got to be qualified, and they've got to be responsible for the standards of instruction. We can't afford a situation where youngsters could be going out and getting killed.
But whatever the caveats, it must be a good idea to separate the job of learning how to control a vehicle from that of negotiating it along our crowded public roads. And if the logic holds true for motorcycles, it must be true for cars as well. So our very best wishes to early drive and schemes like it. Now to the final chapter in a story that seems to have captured the imagination of many of our viewers. In the spring we took a look at the Itala that won the Peking-Paris rally in 1907 before it set off to recreate that famous pioneering journey. The car set out from Peking on the 24th of March, 2 months before the terrible events of Tiananmen Square transformed the relaxed and happy atmosphere of the capital. Fiat, the event's organisers, had decided to send the Itala and its attendant convoy of support vehicles on a different route from the original. Prince Borghese had taken the Itala basically on a direct line across the Gobi Desert and Siberia. But this time the car took a more southerly route, through Pakistan, Iran and Turkey, before heading north to Moscow. Now, back in 1907, the Itala had to be hauled by men and horses up rocky slopes where there was no track for vehicles. But 80 years later, they could really motor, so long as the elements didn't intervene. No matter what difficulties the climate and the terrain presented, this immensely strong car took them all in its stride. Just like Ettore Guisardi in 1907, the Fiat mechanic spent 3 to 4 hours a day looking after the Itala, greasing all the moving parts and resetting the ignition. In fact, the rotor arms needed replacing about every 2,500 miles, and 4 new oil pump belts were fitted. But beyond that, the engine gave absolutely no trouble. The rough ride snapped a couple of leaves in the front springs, but amazingly the whole journey was completed on a single set of tyres. Now, considering the quality of the road surfaces, at least when the tarmac ran out, that's a remarkable testimony to the strength of the design, faithfully copied by Pirelli from the one used in 1907. But of course, there were times when the Itala was brought to a halt.
called in the Pakistani army to clear this slide on the 16,000-foot Kunjarab Pass, just over the border from China. But despite these hold-ups, the Itala was able to average 150 miles a day. Once out of the mountains, the biggest problem was the oppressive heat. Across the Baluchistan desert, it reached 115 degrees in the shade. Iran presented a different picture, smooth roads and the landscape of rich green vegetation among the monumental ruins. Then there was a meeting with the Prime Minister to attend in Tehran before pressing on through Turkey to the Soviet Union. Once in Europe, the going was easier, though the cobbles of Moscow sorely tested the Itala's weary springs. After the usual official reception, it was on again, through the endless towns and villages of Eastern Europe. The convoy was now averaging over 200 miles a day. Now, instead of being met by camels and horses, the Itala was greeted by open cars, cavalcades of welcome, until on June the 24th, it reached Paris. So, after 3 months on the road and nearly 16,000 miles, the journey was complete. This tough old car, with its 80-year-old technology, had done it again. Another extraordinary triumph.
Well, the Itala has now returned to honourable retirement in the Fiat Museum in Turin, where it should be safe from vandalism or theft. But the only deterrent, in fact, of stealing the Itala was the very complicated procedure for starting it. Nowadays, of course, security systems are far more sophisticated. But even so, according to the latest figures, we can expect 1.25 million cars to be stolen or broken into this year. A growing problem, accounting for about a quarter of all recorded crime, and yet not one, it seems, we're taking very seriously. Here's Chris again.
Now, a lot of that crime is opportunist, people stealing cars for a joyride to get home from the pub, breaking windows to snatch handbags and perhaps car radios. But the hardcore problem for nice cars like this out on the street is the professional car thief who's out to steal them, to respray them, to change them and sell them to people like you and me.
They're shrewd, very shrewd, but they take advantage of people's ignorance about the sort of steps that they should take when purchasing a motor vehicle. Here we are targeted towards the professional car criminal, the man that makes a very good living out of stealing high-value motor cars and defrauding members of the public of their money for the cars.
How big a problem is car crime?
Well, in the United Kingdom, 387,000 vehicles have been stolen over the past 5 years, none of which have been recovered.
Now, this looks like a normal multi-storey car park, but the thing all these cars have in common, they've all been stolen, because we're inside the headquarters of Scotland Yard's Stolen Car Squad. So how do you avoid buying a stolen car? Well, one of the obvious lessons, be careful about obvious bargains. This man went out to buy an A registration Nissan Stanza and he knew what he'd have to pay for it. Suddenly a B registration one comes up £1,000 cheaper. Greed overcomes common sense and he buys it. If he'd looked more closely, he would have seen where they've welded in a new stamped-in chassis number. But of course, if you buy a stolen car, you've lost all your money. You've got no title, you've got no redress. Let's have a look at some other examples from this black museum of stolen cars. Lovely C registration Granada for you, or an E registration Escort. What have they got in common? Well, in fact, we've got 4 Fords here. What the thieves have done is bought 2 wrecks. Now, both these cars had heavy front-end damage. They cut the damaged front ends off, then they went out and they stole another Granada, another Escort, cut off the front end and weld them to the rear end of the wrecks. Why go to all that trouble? Well, both cars have true identities. They've got logbooks, they've got number plates that match up, they've got chassis plates that match up, and they can be sold as genuine cars to some poor buyer. Let's see how they did it with the Escort. Fortunately, the police found this car before it was finished, but would you spot a weld here after it had been smoothed and sprayed over? The more popular the vehicle, the easier it is to sell, and thus the more attractive for the car thieves. Now, these Range Rovers were in a dealer's showroom on the Friday night. They were stolen, advertised in the Sunday papers and sold before the end of the weekend. In fact, before the dealer even knew they were missing. In this case, they were sold on forged registration documents, and that's something else to be very careful about when you're buying a used car. You need to know what the proper typeface of a vehicle registration document should look like. that it's got a watermark and that there's a clear link between the name on the piece of the paper and the man that purports to own the car that you're buying. Even something as simple as a missing fuel filler cap can be a danger signal. They could have broken into it to gain information on the ignition key number. Of course, a lot of modern cars have one key operation for the ignition, the door lock and the petrol cap. Now, if you need two keys, beware, it could have been made up of two different cars. A lovely Mercedes sports car. In this case, the thieves know of the existence of a blue 380 SL. They then go and steal a similar car and they put the same number plate on it. You've got two Mercedes driving around the country with the same plate on. They get a duplicate of the logbook, they can get duplicates of the service history. Everything seems to fit. So when you buy the car, the only thing that tells you whether you're buying the real car or the stolen car is the vehicle identification number. If that checks, you're safe. If you must buy from the small ads of your local newspaper, your first point of contact is going to be the telephone, and that can give you some important clues. Don't ask about the particular model that's for sale, ask about the car for sale. If they say which car, you know they've got several, and the alarm bell should start ringing. And if the phone number starts 0836 or 0860, that means it's a mobile phone and not a house phone. People on mobile phones tend to move around a bit. Don't be persuaded to meet halfway in a motorway service area or a pub. You want to go to this person's home. So you've made your phone calls, made your appointments, and you turn up to a scene of domestic bliss. But is it all it appears? Does this guy actually own the house, and does he own the car? Now, you can establish a link between car, house and person by the vehicle registration document, obviously, but what you also need to do is to look at service records with the address of the house on them, and preferably a bill of sale with the man's name and address on that as well. Now, these are simple precautions, but by taking them, you avoid the possibility of losing all your money by buying a stolen car. Morning.
And if you do visit a house like that, make sure you go inside, because the police have heard of thieves borrowing a drive, as it were, in order to disguise their true intent. Asked to use the loop apps. If they get evasive, then back off. Right now to the Tour of Britain, 7 days of fiercely competitive driving, ended up with this hour-long race at the Brands Hatch Grand Prix circuit. Tony Mason was in at the beginning a week ago in Bedfordshire.
The unlikely setting of Cardington's gigantic airship hangar was the starting point for the revived Tour of Britain, an ambitious event designed to bring together in a single competition the cream from both racing and rallying. Among the entry, two of the best-known faces in British motorsport, Derek Bell and Roger Clark. But one of them was surprised to be there at all.
Good heavens, a face from the past. What are you doing here?
Morning, Tony. We're going to play for the week, with the sound of it.
This is a surprise.
It was a surprise to me last night at about 10:30. It's a very pleasant one.
Have you actually ever driven one of these before?
Never sat in one before. We've got plenty of time to learn this week.
Roger was standing in for Formula One driver Johnny Herbert, taken ill at the last minute. It meant 5 times Le Mans winner Derek Bell was somewhat isolated.
You're the best-known circuit driver on the event. How are you going to get on against the rally men?
Well, on the circuit's probably half reasonably. They've got a bit more power, but the car handles very well. And then on the rally stages, well, they're going to have the advantage. But, you know, I've learnt quite a lot, I suppose, in the last 2 years, although they're out every 2 weeks and I'm out once a year. But it's going to be great fun, and I'm looking forward to it with great enthusiasm.
Despite Derek's optimism, it looked a bit like a walkover for the rallymen, much as in the old Tour of Britain. While the first event in 1973 was won by James Hunt in a Camaro Z28, after that it was rally drivers to the fore, with Roger Clark himself winning in 74, showing superb car control in his Escort RS2000. At Silverstone on the opening day, that skill was back in action. But Jimmy McRae in Sierra No. 3 was already showing a speed and stamina that was to leave everyone trailing. Among the lower numbers, another Scot, 21-year-old Robbie Head, was also enjoying himself.
Yeah, well, we've never raced before, and the first time I think was Silverstone. We won our first race, so it was great. I had some feeling getting the checkered flag.
So he's whetted your appetite for racing?
Well, I don't know. I think the Forest presents a bit more of a challenge, certainly.
Robbie was eventually to finish third, but his success demonstrated a principle about the problem for racing drivers.
I think it's more difficult for a racing driver. I'm speaking as a rally journalist, I don't know. It's more difficult for a racing driver to go on a stage than the other way around. And equally, if you're in production saloons, people think, oh, you've got the right car already. you have, but you have to register it for the road and things like that, and that's quite a complex process to be gone through, and of course to convert it to lead-free petrol. So I think that's probably deterred a number of people.
With only 25 taking part, retirements would have been disastrous, and it didn't look good when Brian Wiggins, Derek Bell's chief rival, rolled his Astra at Silverstone. He soon recovered, but Roger Clark's chances took a nosedive with a puncture at Castle Coombe.
And it happened early enough so that if I had carried on, I'd still have to do 3 more laps to get this 75% penalty, which I would have thought it will wreck a car or wreck suspension. This early in the race, I elected to stop and take a maximum.
There were more problems in Wales, where 2 forestry stages had to be cancelled. Then it was off to Liverpool for the ferry to Ireland. 2 days of tests in both the south and north followed before moving on to Scotland and then back south to end the week at Brands Hatch. It was an ambitious plan, but the small field was probably due to the problems of using basically standard Group N cars, also needing to be adapted to use unleaded fuel, plus the extra expense of the trip to Ireland. So what was the sponsor's verdict?
The small field at first, maybe a bit twitchy if you like. The reception we've had around the country, not just from the media, but from the people who've turned out all the time, is almost a sponsor's dream. We need more entries, if you like, if we're going to do this in the future, but we're very, very happy as Autoglass.
Day 5 in Scotland and Jimmy McRae was still leading. He could generally dispose of Graham Middleton's 4-wheel drive Toyota on the circuits like Ingliston, but the new British National Rally champion was only a minute or so down, thanks to his Celica's better traction in the forests and at the Croft Rallycross. Day 6, and it was my turn to join Derek Bell in the Astra, but the complicated Fort Dunlop auto test was one to forget. Getting the route wrong meant a maximum penalty, but we were in good company. Some addled brains meant only 7 drivers got it right and thus avoided any penalties. Peterborough and the East of England showground was more fun.
2:30, 2 minutes 30.
Fastest time so far. Fastest time so far. That was very exhilarating indeed. We saw the Derek Bell racing driver there, lots of fast straights and tarmac, a little bit of loose. You enjoyed that, didn't you?
Yeah, it was fantastic, yeah.
I don't think it was helped by the bottle flying around in my feet.
And also he lost his damn stopwatch, he's fumbling around like this. So we couldn't argue with the timekeepers.
Great.
Okay.
Then it was on to Snetterton and a night race, something Derek Bell is well used to. But it was to bring the end of the Celica's challenge. Brake failure on the 130-mile-an-hour straight led to a series of barrel rolls and a shaken, but thankfully uninjured, Graham Middleton out of the rally. And so to Brands Hatch, the final event and a chance to reflect on a hectic week's motoring.
It's been absolutely superb, Tony. It has been the business. I've had more dramas and offs and ons, but it's been fantastic. The camaraderie, everything. I mean, I didn't like this guy before the event, and now I'm thinking of adopting him.
I still don't like him. He's said it all there, you know. It's been fantastic. And to find we're now, I think, 10 seconds in front of Roger Clark with 50-odd miles to go is terrific.
Roger Clark's chances of grabbing second place evaporated when his turbo failed, but he was still cheerful. How did he compare with the earlier tours that you did?
Very similar in character and flavour. Quite long road sections and all sorts of tests thrown at you, which is very easy to make all sorts of mistakes on, which I think virtually everyone has found out. It's been very good.
So would you come again?
Love to.
From Derek Bell, a similar positive response.
It was great. I enjoyed it very much. I think it was a great idea, and it was fabulous for me to get out in the forest and play at something I've never done really before. It was just very exciting, and I think any racing driver should have a go at the forest before he says he's finished, because it's another world.
After scrutineering, a time penalty for Astra rival Brian Wiggins gave Derek Bell a win in his class, and other alleged technical infringements meant the results are still provisional. But Jimmy McRae wasn't worrying about that.
I think it's obviously it's a very good event, and it's a shame they didn't get the entry they deserved. But I'm quite sure with the atmosphere and everybody that's finished or everybody that's here tells everybody else there'll be a lot more entries next year. I think they deserve it.
Well, our congratulations to Jim McRae on an impressive win. Indeed, our congratulations to all the competitors. Obviously, they had a very good time. One has to ask, I think, though, can this event survive with so thin an entry? Tony, what do you think went wrong?
Well, not a lot actually. I think that it was rather over-ambitious for a first event. There was the trip to Ireland, which was an innovation. There was the unleaded fuel. They were all Group N standard cars. There were too many new things, perhaps. But it has been a success. The organisation has been impeccable. And I think that people have seen this and they'll all come back next year in reasonable quantities.
Well, they certainly do seem determined to come back again next year. That's all from Top Gear for this week. Next week we celebrate 30 years of the Mini. We road test the Mazda 323 and the Honda Accord. So see you then. Until then, drive safely. Good night.